How did a single anonymous tip destroy a wedding, a reputation, and a family all at once? She stood under a canopy of pale blue hydrangeas, her heart thudding against her ribs, the soft murmur of guests suddenly replaced by hushed confusion. Moments ago, the air had vibrated with anticipation. Crisp suits, pastel dresses, the swirl of camera shutters capturing every hopeful smile. But when her phone rang, of all times just as the officiant was about to begin, the festive atmosphere froze. She felt every pair of eyes turning her way, and the hush that fell was absolute. I had never seen my sister Taylor look so uncertain. She was always the composed one. Straight-A student, college valedictorian, a rising star at the marketing firm where she worked. But that, in her wedding gown, her face ashen as she held the phone to her ear, she might as well have been a child lost in a nightmare. My name is Miranda, and I was her maid of honor, though after everything that happened, I wonder if I should have been there at all. Taylor, I whispered, barely audible. Who is it? She didn't answer, just kept nodding at whatever voice was on the line. A cold sweat trickled down my back. The officiant glanced at me with worried eyes. The guests shifted uncomfortably, and behind them all, near the back row, I noticed someone slip away, a tall figure, face indistinct, disappearing through the heavy doors. For a split second, an icy dread seized me, though I couldn't say why. Then Taylor's phone clattered to the ground. That was the first sign. The second came when she turned to her fiancé, Jason Reed, and whispered with trembling lips, "They know." Jason's face paled, confusion battling panic in his eyes. He turned to me, but all I could do was stare back helplessly. The officiant cleared his throat. The guests rustled in their seats, but no one moved, as though we were all hypnotized by the horror etched on Taylor's face. She swallowed hard and managed 3 words that sealed the fate of the entire day, maybe even the entire family. "We have to stop." Suddenly, voices erupted in disjointed exclamations of shock and disbelief. Chairs screeched on the polished floor. People stood or leaned forward, hurling hushed questions. Jason grabbed Taylor's arm, begging her to explain, but she just kept shaking her head, eyes filled with tears. By the time she finally managed to speak more than 2 words, half the crowd had begun murmuring theories. Is she sick? Cold feet? Did he cheat? Some faces held pity. Others contained what looked suspiciously like grim satisfaction. In every corner, tension bristled like static. "I'm sorry," Taylor finally choked out, addressing Jason in a voice so broken it barely sounded like hers. "We can't do this. Not until we figure out what's going on. I don't want to ruin everything, but I can't pretend we didn't get that call." I slipped an arm around her, and Jason stood there as if he'd forgotten how to breathe. He stared at her with such desperation that I felt tears burning my own eyes. Then our mother, Jean Hawkins, rushed forward, nearly colliding with the officiant in her haste. She pressed a trembling hand to Taylor's cheek. "Sweetheart, calm down. Who called? What happened?" Mom's voice was gentle, but the subtext was obvious. This was not supposed to be happening. This was our perfect day, the day the Hawkins family would finally celebrate some good fortune after years of heartbreak. Taylor shook her head, stammering, I can't say it in front of everyone." She looked around at the sea of faces. So many stunned, so many curious. Jason's best man hovered uncertainly by the altar, his expression caught between alarm and confusion. My father, Thomas Hawkins, stood off to the side, his mouth set in a grim line. And in that moment, the towering floral arch, the aisle lined with candles, the delicate harp music, none of it mattered any. The day was already ruined, all because of a single phone call. We ushered the guests to the reception hall with the promise that we'd sort out some technical difficulty. I doubt anyone believed it, but they went anyway. The hush that fell over the main ceremony space was deafening once the crowd dispersed. Only family and the bridal party remained, like the aftermath of a storm. Jason tried to lead Taylor to a seat, but she insisted on standing, her whole body shaking. I handed her a bottle of water from the catering tray. She took a few sips, then shoved it away. "Someone knows," she repeated, staring at him. "Knows about your father, about the missing funds, about what we tried to cover up." I felt my throat clench. This was not the kind of conversation you expected in the middle of a wedding. Jason's father, Dean Reed, had died the previous year under a shadow of financial scandal. At the time, there were rumors about embezzlement, some hush-hush arrangement, but nothing had ever been proven. Jason had never told me details, only that he was sure his father hadn't acted alone. Now it seemed the skeletons in the Reed's closet were rattling louder than ever. Jason's eyes flickered. "We agreed not to talk about that," he said, voice tight. "The investigation was closed. Nothing was proven. My father's legacy is..." Taylor let out a ragged laugh. "His legacy is what's about to destroy us. Whoever called said if we don't stop the wedding, they'll release proof that your father stole from half his investors, that your mother was complicit, that our family, the Hawkins, helped hide the money trail after he died. I felt my heart drop. Mom and Dad exchanged stricken looks. We never, Dad began, but his words faltered. Suddenly, I recalled overhearing late-night phone calls in our house over a year ago. My father speaking in hushed, anxious tones about protecting the Reeds. At the time, I'd chalked it up to gossip. Now I wasn't so sure. Jason looked like he'd been punched in the gut. Why would they do this? Who even has that information? He rubbed his face, turning his gaze to Miranda. Do you know who called? How would I know? I snapped back, anxiety twisting my stomach. I just saw Taylor drop her phone. I didn't hear anything else. My voice sounded angrier than I intended, but I was terrified. We'd all known the swirling rumors around Dean Reed's death, about suspicious bank records, secret transactions. Even so, we'd believed those rumors would die down if we kept quiet long enough. Mom pressed her lips together, struggling to keep her composure. We have to think calm. Let's move to the side room, she suggested. The wedding guests will wait in the hall. We can still salvage this. Maybe it's just a bluff. Taylor started to protest that a bluff wouldn't sound so specific, but we all filed into a small side chapel where the wedding party had gotten ready earlier. The cheerful bouquets and champagne glasses looked grotesquely out of place now. My father pulled the door shut behind us, and the sudden closeness made my skin crawl. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Mom said, voice trembling, Thomas, tell them. Tell them what you told me last year about the Reeds' money. My father closed his eyes. When he opened them, he looked years older. I never wanted to burden the girls with this, he began in a hushed tone. But Dean was a friend, for better or worse. When he was under investigation, he came to me for help. He didn't want to drag Jason's mother into it, but she already knew enough to be implicated. So I pulled some strings, called in favors, arranged lawyers. The papers never picked up the story because we kept it sealed. I swore we'd keep quiet, let the rumors die. Dean passed away before any trial could happen, so it all evaporated. He paused, swallowing hard. I guess we hoped it would stay buried forever. Now someone wants it to see the light of day, and they're using the wedding as leverage. Taylor stood rigid, arms folded across her satin bodice. Why? Why destroy us now? And who are they? Could be an investor who lost money, Mom offered, or a relative who hated Dean, or someone who wants to humiliate our family for covering it up. Jason swore under his breath. My mother, Gail, didn't know all the details. I mean, I never told her about any official help from your side. Don't lie, Taylor said, voice shaking. If I found out about it, your mother must have known. She's the one who told me to keep quiet when the detective questioned you after your dad's funeral. I wanted to be honest, but she insisted we give nothing away. She looked near tears again. Oh God, we're all tangled in this, aren't we? Jason ran a hand through his hair, breathing hard. I'll do whatever it takes to keep you out of this, he said, reaching for her hand. We can't let them blackmail us into canceling the wedding. We love each other. Isn't that the point? Taylor's reply was cut short by a knock at the door. My cousin Joseph stuck his head in. Hey, they're getting restless out there. Do you want me to tell them it's postponed? Or do we keep stalling? He took in our grim faces. Wow, it's bad, isn't it? Mom told him to stall, and he left as quietly as he'd come. I turned to Taylor. You have to decide now. Either we do the wedding despite this threat, or we postpone until we figure out who's behind it. I felt a pang of guilt even saying it. This should have been the happiest day of her life, not an ultimatum. Taylor's eyes brimmed. I can't get married with this hanging over us. And if they send those documents to every guest, we'll be humiliated. Dad could face obstruction of justice charges or who knows what else. Gail might lose everything if she's implicated. And Jason, she trailed off, unable to finish. Jason closed his eyes and exhaled. We'll postpone. I don't like it, but we'll do it. He swallowed, looking as though he might collapse. I swear, as soon as we figure out who's behind this, we'll reschedule. I love you, Taylor. I'm not giving up. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. Then, as if some silent agreement had passed through the room, we filed out together. The weight of dread and shame pressed on all of us. Our mother went to address the guests, her composure faltering only once or twice. She explained in a trembling voice that there had been an unexpected emergency. Sorrowful sighs and disappointed faces filled the hall. People asked if Taylor was ill, if someone in the family had a health crisis. Mom gave non-committal answers, urging them to take home the favors and help themselves to the buffet. No one seemed fooled, but they left with murmured condolences. It was painful to watch. Taylor had slipped away to a dressing room, refusing to see anyone. Jason went looking for his mother, Gail, who'd been strangely absent since the fiasco began. Dad stood by the door in grim silence, occasionally exchanging polite words with well-meaning relatives. As I passed by him, I asked, "Should I find Gail? She needs to know." Dad's jaw tightened. Yes, check the bride's lounge or the corridor. She might have gone for air. He rubbed his temples like he was battling a headache. Miranda, this is going to be ugly. I'd do anything to protect our family, but it might be too late. The hallway outside the main chapel was deserted except for a few stray decorations. I was about to turn the corner when I heard hushed voices in a side alcove. Gale Reed and an unfamiliar man stood close, speaking in urgent whispers. My heart pounded as I ducked behind a pillar, straining to listen. Gale was dressed in an elegant silver gown, her posture rigid. You said you wouldn't do this here, she hissed. Do you have any idea what's happened? The man's voice was low and calm. It was time. I warned you that if your son went through with the wedding, the truth would come out. He paused, then added with a sneer, I take it you're ready to make our arrangement official? Gale's voice shook. They've postponed the ceremony, that's all. We can still fix this. If you just let me... You can't fix anything, the man said. Dean ruined a lot of lives and you'll pay You want your little boy to remain unscathed, right? Then you'll follow through, or next time, I'll send the evidence to every major news outlet in the state. I clamped a hand over my mouth, horrified. This was the blackmailer, or at least someone connected to the blackmail. My knees trembled. Should I confront him? Should I call for help? I had no proof, no phone in hand to record. I was paralyzed by fear. Just then, Gale noticed me. Her expression turned to panic. She grabbed the man's arm, pointing in my direction. I scrambled back, nearly tripping over a decorative lantern before sprinting down the corridor. Footsteps pounded behind me. I whipped around another corner, breath coming in ragged gasps. The footsteps slowed, then stopped. I glanced back to see Gale and the man at the corridor's end. He said something to her, and she shook her head, tears on her cheeks. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into a stairwell. Gale hesitated, looking torn, but eventually she too left in the opposite direction. Heart hammering, I crept back into the chapel. Most of the guests had gone. The staff was clearing away floral arrangements, and my father was deep in conversation with Jason. I found my mother first, quietly sobbing in the side room. Mom, I whispered, kneeling beside her. I think Gale is involved. She was talking to some man about blackmail. I overheard them. They said she'd have to follow through, or else proof about Dean's crimes would go public. Mom's face twisted in confusion. Gale? Are you sure? Yes, but I don't know if she's behind it or if she's being coerced. She seemed scared. I briefly described the encounter. Mom wiped her tears and stood up, eyes red but determined. We have to tell Taylor and Jason, she said, and your father. At least we know someone behind this is physically here. Maybe we can stop him. But by the time we regrouped, the man was long gone. The staff had seen no stranger walking around, and the guests were gone. Gale was nowhere to be found. Jason, frantic, kept calling her cell phone without success. Taylor was still in her dressing room, so I went to fetch her. I found her sitting on a plush velvet bench, dress rumpled, eyes puffy from crying. Carefully, I told her everything I'd over. She stared at me in shock and then cursed under her breath. My God, you think my mother is behind this or working with the person behind this? It might be the other way around, I said gently. She might be getting blackmailed too. Maybe there's more to Dean's scandal than we realized. Jason burst into the room then, hair disheveled, phone clutched in one hand. Mom's not answering. Taylor, please, can we talk about this? We need to figure out who that man is and what kind of arrangement she made. Maybe we can cut him off at the source. Taylor looked at him with anguish in her eyes. Jason, everything's a mess. Even if we do find him, your mother's clearly hiding something huge. How can we fix this if your own family is working against us? He grabbed her hand. We can't let them break us. I'll face whatever truths come out. I love you. She let herself collapse into his arms, sobbing quietly, while I watched from the corner, helpless. Part of me wished I'd never urged her to marry into the Reed family. Part of me wondered if we should have listened to our father's warnings that the Reeds were burdened by too many secrets. But as Dad always said, you can't choose whom you love. Over the next few hours, the wedding venue emptied. The caterers packed up untouched meals, the florist retrieved vases, and the photographer quietly removed his equipment. It was one of the saddest sights I'd ever witnessed. My father and Jason asked the manager for security footage, hoping to catch a glimpse of the mysterious man. But it turned out the cameras near the corridor were malfunctioning, or so the manager claimed. When Jason asked to see the logs, the manager looked uneasy, muttering about a short circuit. Taylor insisted on going home with me instead of Jason. She said she needed space to think. Jason hovered uncertainly, wanting to stay, but she reminded him that we can't just pretend it's all okay. With a heavy heart, he drove off to search for Gale. Meanwhile, Dad helped load our car with Taylor's wedding gifts, ironic souvenirs of a day that never happened. That night, Taylor slept fitfully on my couch, still in her wedding dress for half the evening, refusing to take it off. She stared at the ceiling, tears silently falling. Finally, around 3 a.m., she let me help her unzip and step out of the satin and lace. She curled up in an oversized t-shirt and whispered, "I was so happy, Miranda. I had no idea how close we were to disaster." The next morning brought no solace. My phone buzzed with messages from curious friends, tabloids sniffing for scandal, extended family members demanding explanations. The rumor mill churned out theories, from Jason cheated with the maid of honor, which was absurd, to Taylor's pregnant and backing out, also absurd. Neither of us had the energy to respond. Around noon, Dad called. "I just heard from Jason," he said in a clipped tone. "He found Gail. She refuses to discuss what happened at the chapel. Says she was cornered by an old acquaintance who wants money. Swears it's just a personal matter. Nothing to do with the wedding. Jason doesn't believe her. Neither do I." Taylor, listening on speakerphone, shook her head. This old acquaintance threatened to expose Dad's involvement in Dean's cover-up. "That's not a personal matter." Dad's sigh crackled on the line. "I know. Listen, we might need to bring in a private investigator. If we keep letting them blackmail us, they'll ruin both families anyway." We agreed to meet that evening at my parents' house to discuss our next step. As I hung up, Taylor buried her face in her hands. "This is too big. Investigators, blackmail, hidden funds. It's like we're in some ridiculous noir movie." Despite her fear, a spark of determination lit up her eyes. "But I won't let them keep me from Jason. Whoever they are, they can't just destroy our happiness because of some ancient grudge." I felt a flicker of relief. At least she still believed in them. "We'll figure it out," I promised, hoping it wasn't a lie. Dad called a private investigator named Mitchell Crowley, a middle-aged man with a stoic demeanor and a slight limp. He arrived just after sundown, wearing a worn leather jacket. We gathered in the living room, me, Taylor, Mom, Dad, and eventually Jason, who showed up after driving for hours in search of leads on the mysterious man. Gail was conspicuously absent. Dad introduced Crowley as an old friend, though the investigator looked more like a retired policeman with a chip on his shoulder. Crowley wasted no time. "Tell me the story from the top," he said in a gravelly voice, pulling out a notepad. We recounted the events, from the phone call at the altar to my overhearing Gail in the hallway. Crowley's expression never changed, but he jotted down copious notes, occasionally nodding. When we finished, he asked a barrage of questions. Who else knew about the alleged cover-up? Who had financial motives against Dean's estate? Could the wedding have triggered a new inheritance clause? Did Gail stand to gain or lose money if the wedding went through? The more he dug, the more my stomach churned. There were too many angles to count. Finally, he looked at Jason. "Any idea who your father's enemies might be? Someone who lost a significant sum?" Jason grimaced. He had dozens of disgruntled clients, but the investigation never pinned him down. "If they're after me too, it's personal." Taylor cleared her throat. "It's also personal for me, for our family. We're being threatened with legal exposure for helping bury the scandal. My parents could face charges or maybe just massive reputational damage. Either way, we're cornered." Crowley gave a curt nod. "All right, let me do some digging. I'll start with your father's legal records, Ms. Hawkins, and the old files from Dean Reed's case. If Gail Reed is in contact with the blackmailer, I'll try to trace her movements or phone logs." He paused. "But I should warn you, digging might unearth more secrets than you bargained." Mom clasped her hands in her lap. "We have no choice. We'd rather face the truth than live in fear of an anonymous threat." So we waited. Days crept by with agonizing slowness. Gossip raged on social media about the wedding that wasn't. Friends texted me incessantly, asking if Taylor and Jason had broken up, if there was an affair, if someone had died mid-ceremony. At first, I tried to set the record straight, but eventually I went silent, exhausted by the drama. Meanwhile, Gail refused to speak to anyone but Jason, and even with him, she gave only half-truths. She insisted that the man from the corridor was a former associate of Dean's, someone who blamed Dean for a business collapse years back. She denied knowing about any hush money or stolen funds, but admitted she'd seen documents that might implicate the Hawkins family in something illegal. Jason believed she was lying to protect him, but he also sensed she was trapped under the weight of her husband's legacy. It drove a wedge between him and Taylor, who was furious that Gail wouldn't be transparent. One evening, I found Taylor standing in her old bedroom at our parents' house, staring at a half-packed box of wedding decorations. "I can't decide what to do with any of this," she said in a small voice, lifting a delicate glass ornament shaped like a heart. "Should I store it, throw it away, donate it? It feels like a monument to everything I've lost." My heart twisted. "You haven't lost Jason, not if you still love each other." She rubbed her eyes. "Love isn't enough if we're caught in this web of lies." I keep thinking about that phone call. The voice told me they had proof of us conspiring to protect a criminal. I wonder if there's any truth to it. Did we, by staying silent about Dean's shady deals, become accomplices? I hesitated. Maybe we did in a way, But it's not too late to come clean. She gave me a bleak smile. Easy to say, hard to do when the police could start investigating Mom and Dad. The next day, Crowley returned with partial findings. They weren't good. He'd discovered that Gail had recently transferred a large sum of money to an unlisted account, an account possibly linked to a man named Anthony Wyatt, once a business partner of Dean's. Wyatt had lost everything in a real estate venture that Dean had spearheaded. Crowley suspected Wyatt was the blackmailer, looking to recoup his losses or exact revenge. As for Gail, she might be trying to pay him off to keep him quiet. When we confronted Gail, she broke down. She confessed that she'd been threatened for months. Wyatt had approached her with evidence of Dean's crimes, including records of hush money from Taylor's father. Gail was terrified of scandal and had been secretly funneling payments to Wyatt, hoping he'd disappear. But Wyatt wanted more. He wanted to humiliate the entire family, especially since it meant leveraging their secrets at the most public moment possible, the wedding. Taylor looked as though her heart was shattering all over again. So you let him sabotage our wedding? You let him call me in the middle of the ceremony, make me humiliate myself in front of everyone I love. Gail sobbed. I had no choice. He said if I tried to intervene, he'd release the information even sooner, maybe in front of the reporters. I had to wait to see if there was a chance it could still go through without him intervening. But then he insisted I finalize a larger payment. When I refused, he used you as leverage. I'm so sorry. Jason was livid, accusing Gail of lies, but the tears in her eyes looked genuine. She pulled out a folder stuffed with incriminating documents. Bank statements, contract forms, illicit wire transfers. Some implicated Dad directly in burying certain records for Dean. My mother's face was ashen. Taylor trembled with rage, tears glistening in her eyes. We were all in over our heads. Crowley urged the families to go to the police, but Dad hesitated, afraid of being arrested for conspiracy. Taylor and Jason felt caught in the middle, uncertain which path was safer, face the law or remain at Wyatt's mercy. Eventually, the stress became unbearable. Taylor collapsed one afternoon, overwhelmed by panic. Jason carried her to a clinic where they administered mild sedatives. She spent 2 days recovering, a haunted look in her eyes. Each time she asked about the future, no one had an answer. The turning point came when Wyatt, clearly emboldened by his partial victory at the wedding, threatened to leak additional evidence unless Gail delivered a final, massive payout. This time, Dad agreed with Jason's plan to set a trap, working with Crowley. They arranged a meeting at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, with Gail pretending she'd deliver the money. Meanwhile, Crowley had discreetly involved a trusted detective from his old days on the force, ensuring there'd be officers nearby to make an arrest. Taylor insisted on being present, if only to see the man who had ruined her wedding. Jason refused at first, fearing for her safety, but she wouldn't be deterred. They compromised. She'd wait in a car some distance away with tinted windows, while Gail confronted Wyatt inside. On a chilly evening, we all gathered at the warehouse. Dad and I stayed behind in Crowley's car, hearts pounding, while Jason sat with Taylor in their SUV. Gail went in with a small duffel bag filled mostly with fake bills, just enough real cash to seem legitimate. Within minutes, Wyatt appeared, a tall man in a coat, face partially obscured by a baseball cap. Gail's voice quavered as she asked him to confirm he had the files. He held up a flash drive, smiling coldly. That was the moment the police were supposed to move in. But something went wrong. Wyatt must have smelled a setup. He bolted, dashing out a side exit. The detective's men pursued, shouting orders, but he was fast. Chaos erupted. Gail ran outside, screaming that Wyatt was getting away. Crowley and the officers tried to chase him, but he vanished into the darkness. A flash of headlights near the corner revealed a second car. Wyatt must have had an accomplice. They sped off, tires squealing. We failed. For a moment, it felt like all the air had been sucked out of the night. Then Dad lurched forward in the seat. He got away with the evidence. Now what? He sounded desperate. Taylor and Jason raced up to us, frantic. She was trembling from the cold and the adrenaline, tears in her eyes. Is it over? She choked out. Please tell me we got him. Crowley shook his head. But at least he knows we're on to him. Might make him think twice before showing his face again. The disappointment was crushing. Yet, ironically, Wyatt's narrow escape triggered something else. A renewed determination to clean house. The next day, Dad called a lawyer to see about voluntarily disclosing his role in burying Dean's scandal. It would be damaging, but maybe less so than being exposed by Wyatt. Gail agreed to turn over every document she had about Dean's crimes, acknowledging she could face legal repercussions. Jason supported her, though it pained him to see his mother admit to enabling his father. Taylor found a grim sort of resolve in all this. She told me, if we lose everything, at least we won't live in fear anymore. Weeks passed as depositions were made, deals were cut, Reputations took a blow. The press got wind of the partially reopened investigation but lacked full details. Meanwhile, Wyatt's threats quieted. Perhaps he realized his leverage was vanishing once our families went public. The wedding fiasco was still fresh in everyone's minds, but the tabloids moved on to other stories. Slowly, Taylor and Jason found their footing again. They still loved each other. That hadn't changed. One summer morning, they visited the small chapel where they'd almost been wed. The staff had cleaned up and decorated for a new event, and everything smelled of fresh roses. The memory weighed heavily on both of them, but they walked the aisle hand in hand, determined to reclaim a piece of what they'd lost. Not long after, they decided to try again, quietly this time. No grand ceremony, no massive guest list, just a handful of close friends and family who understood the truth behind the chaos. I was there to witness it. Taylor in a simple white dress, Jason in a classic suit, exchanging vows in a private sunlit garden. It was nothing like the wedding we'd planned for them, but there was beauty in its simplicity, and in the honesty they carried into their union. Wyatt was never formally apprehended. Rumor had it he fled the state, maybe even the country. The police kept an open file, but with Dean Reed dead and Gail cooperating, there was less incentive to pursue an elusive extortionist. As for our parents, they faced questions and scrutiny, but Dad's lawyer negotiated a settlement. Gail sold some assets to repay misled investors. The scandal was messy, but not catastrophic. Sometimes, in the stillness of late evening, I think back to that phone call that shattered what should have been a perfect day. A single ring, a single tip, unleashed a whirlwind of secrets, guilt, and betrayal. It nearly tore two families apart. Yet, in the aftermath, Taylor and Jason found a truth more solid than any wedding vow recited under false pretenses. They chose each other despite the wreckage, forging a bond that wasn't built on denial, but on acceptance of their flawed history. The day after their quiet ceremony, Taylor told me she didn't regret pausing the original wedding. I wish it hadn't been so public or so painful, she admitted, but if it hadn't happened, we'd still be living a lie. I understood. We can't always choose the moment our illusions break. Sometimes a single anonymous phone call is enough to topple everything we thought we knew. But if we're lucky, on the other side of that collapse, we find a chance to rebuild on stronger ground. That, I suppose, is what saved us all in the end.